The next thing we're going to talk about is some of these lamps that have mist in front of them. So now that we have a little bit of fog in the background, essentially what I did was, considering that layering technique I told you guys about, I started to think about these mid-ground lamps, and I wanted a little bit of sort of fog blowing in front of them. So I've kind of animated this so that these are kind of have a couple different layers of fog just blowing. And it's basically the same technique I taught in Photoreal Elements compositing class, and I went into more detail in that class about that. It's pretty extensive, so feel free to check that one out if you guys are interested in compositing a lot of smoke or fire elements, or elements that have light passing through them, because I have an entire class basically focused on that with interactive bounce light. So anyways, so this is kind of a similar technique here. So essentially what I did was I took a noise pattern, just a broad one, and I took a tiny one. So again, pretty straightforward. Just go in here, you adjust the size, you adjust the lacunarity, and you can adjust the octaves, and then you can adjust the gain and the gamma to get different results. You can also switch this to turbulence, which gives a different result, but this one looks more like clouds, so I usually stick with that. So I took the big one, add some contrast, add the color to it, the bluish kind of color that we use for midtones in this specific shot. And I did the same thing with this smaller one. And this one I added a little bit of greener highlights, because this one's going to catch a little bit more highlights. So again, considering our color scheme, we have the little bit slightly darker, this is kind of green blue, and then we have a little bit more, slightly more green and brighter areas in the small one. And then I just took the big one, I blurred it a little bit, and I masked the little one, so that these little patches of smaller detail is only going to appear in the big clouds, and then merge that over the top, so we get something like that. And if we play that, we can see that it just looks a little bit more layered, to have, instead of just having a flat noise pattern, we have like some smaller details going over the top. And what's cool is you can independently animate these if you want. So you could go here and you could animate this one separately, so it feels more layered. So a lot of times I'll do that. I'll use multiple noise patterns, layer them, and then make the timing in the animations of the Z or the translate X and Y slightly different than the one below. So you kind of feel like there's a little bit of parallax, and it feels more like a 3D effect rather than just a 2D noise. And then just sharpened it a little bit, and yeah, so then we get something like this. Kind of darkened it, so we get something like this. So this is a pretty interesting sharp kind of effect. And the next thing I did was I took the background and I keyed out the brightest areas and pre-multiplied it, and then we do our glow. I also masked the lights that I want to cast light from. Do the exponential glow, blur it a little bit, and then I blew out the highlights to a super white value. So I took the grade and I pushed it past 1. So again, so that helps sometimes when we're doing these kind of effects. You don't always have to do it, but usually what I'm doing is I'm kind of eyeballing it. I'll mix it together, and if it doesn't look right, I'll go back and I'll tweak the values. So and then what I did was I multiplied it, but only in the red, green, and blue. So if you look at the merge node, I'll create a new one. Again, this is taught in my Photoreal Elements class. If we switch this to multiply, but we don't want to multiply the alpha. We just want to put the color. For example, we want to keep the thickness of these clouds and the darkness of these clouds, but we don't want to. Yeah, so if we set it to just a normal multiply and we look at the alpha channel, you see how the alpha channel goes dark. But if I switch it to RGB only, the alpha channel stays the same, but the color is multiplied into the red, green, and blue channels. So essentially we're going to have thicker clouds and dark clouds. So even in these dark areas, we're going to have some kind of clouds by doing it this way. So you just switch the output to RGB instead of RGBA. So it maintains the shape and density of the clouds, but we just put the color. And then if you pre-multiply that, and then I just masked it off in a couple different areas and merge it over. So it gives us a result like that. And now we can see if I hit play, I'm not going to play because it'll take too long to cache, but that mist is actually animated and it will fly through. So that's essentially how we create the mist in front of the lanterns. And then the next thing we want to talk about is some of this extra fog that I did, which is a slightly different technique, so I'll cut that into a different lesson. But I just want to go over this second lamp mist because it's a very similar technique, and we'll just talk about it real fast. So again, circle out the areas I want, key it. So we key it, mask it, pre-multiply it. So we get the highlights, and then we can do the glows. So really broad glow, and then we mask that again by another noise pattern. So we have the noise pattern here. I'm doing the same thing. I have a small noise and a big noise, and I'm screening them together in this case. You can use screen or you can use over. It just depends. You know, you can play around with the gamma and always play around with the look. So it's something you have to merge over the background and then go back and play with it. It's not going to be like you just nail it the first time, unless you're extremely good at that. So yeah, so these ones I kind of have those. So this was the base value. But I kind of put a little bit more yellow into the highlights because I wanted to maintain our color scheme a little bit. So I just keyed the highlights and graded them separately. So we kind of get that sort of interesting color. Instead of just like a flat neutral, we have like sort of a yellowish green in the center. And then I plus that over the top. And I also added a slight glint into that. And the last one for the mist here is a broader one. So I have like the brighter mist, I guess, just sort of just tightly around the lights, and a much broader glow masking the same noise pattern. So we can see the difference between the two. And that one's a little bit more subtle, but it just goes over the top. And you can see that's the effect. So that's 3 layers of mist. For if I just disable and enable, you'll see it's a couple different layers, and the reason I like to use multiple layers is because you'll get different speeds, you'll get different densities, you'll get more randomness, and it's going to make it more believable than just using a single noise pattern and just putting it over your whole shot, because that's what it's going to look like. It's just a noise pattern if you don't break it up with multiple noise patterns and different speed and variation and highlights. So next one we'll talk about in the next lesson. Just make sure there's no more mist here. Yeah. Next one we'll talk about is this fog main, which is a little bit of a different technique. It's similar, but I'll go over this real quick in the next one.